At least 100 Palestinians were killed in airstrikes across Gaza as Israel ramps up its offensive on the enclave. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban announces Budapest's withdrawal from the International Criminal Court as he welcomes Israeli counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu. At least 100 Palestinians were killed in Israeli airstrikes across Gaza. 27 or more of those were killed in a strike on a school in the Tufah neighborhood in the north, housing displaced Palestinians. More than a dozen of those killed in that attack were children, and 5 were women. A separate attack on homes in a nearby neighborhood killed at least 30 more, according to Palestinian medical authorities. The attacks come as Israel ramp up their offensive on the enclave in what it said is a campaign intending to increase pressure on Hamas and eventually expel the group from Gaza. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk expressed his concern at the increased violence in a Security Council session.
Since 1 March, Israeli military operations have killed more than 1,200 Palestinians, including at least 320 children, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza. And bombardments continue of residential buildings, tents, hospitals and schools, including places where Palestinians have been ordered to move. There was no let-up, even as Palestinian families celebrated Eid.
Israel says it's targeting Hamas operatives in what it called command and control centers. The IDF spokesperson says they've struck over 600 targets in Gaza, eliminating more than 250 Hamas members since it resumed fighting on the 18th of March. Hamas condemned the attacks and called them a heinous massacre of innocent civilians. The UN is demanding the immediate cessation of hostilities and urge all parties involved to work together to immediately restore the ceasefire and prevent the further suffering of the Palestinian people. Hungary pulled out of the International Criminal Court as it says it has become a political body in which a democratic state has no place. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban announced the decision at a joint press conference with his Israeli counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu in Budapest on Thursday, a move the Israeli Prime Minister labeled as bold.
You stand with us at the EU, you stand with us at the UN, and you've just taken a bold and principled position on the ICC, and I thank you, Victor. This is not only important for us, it's important for all democracies. It's important to stand up to this corrupt organization.
Orban emphasized that Hungary has a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism.
Magyarország az elmúlt években szabadságszigete volt Európában, és a zsidó-keresztény civilizáció elszánt őre és zászlóvivője is. A sajtónak mondom, hogy a magyar zsidó közösség lélekszámát tekintve Európa harmadik legnagyobb zsidó közössége. És biztosan állíthatom, hogy ma ők vannak egész Európában a legnagyobb biztonságban.
Before the press conference, Netanyahu was received with military honors at the Buda Castle. Last year, the ICC issued a warrant for his arrest on suspicion of genocide, but Orban made clear that the Israeli premier has nothing to fear in Hungary. Coinciding with his visit, the Hungarian government has begun the process of withdrawing from the ICC. It's a backtrack from 25 years ago when Budapest ratified the Rome Statute during Orban's first stint as prime minister.
The main day of the EU Central Asia Summit started with a big announcement. Ursula von der Leyen said that the European Union is allocating 12 billion euros as an investment for the region. This shows how important Central Asia is for the European Union. The leaders also agreed on a joint declaration with the aim of the strategic partnership. This strategic partnership will mean strong political relations between the two blocs and also very, very strong business relations. Here we mostly talk about natural gas, raw material and infrastructure projects. And let's not forget that this summit was the first time when Central Asian leaders were ready to discuss sensitive topics like human rights violations or sanction circumvention. So far, they were not ready to discuss those topics at all. So overall, we can clearly say that this summit was a major step forward in the relationship between the European Union and the Central Asian countries. Sándor Zsíros reported for Euronews from Samarkand, Uzbekistan.
North Macedonia warns of growing Russian influence in the Western Balkans if the EU doesn't commit quickly and clearly on enlargement. Talking to Euronews, Foreign Affairs Minister Tymcho Muczynski emphasizes the country's many difficult compromises for EU membership.
We've changed our flag, we've changed our currency, we've changed our constitution several times. We've even changed the name of our country. All with the promise of a window of opportunity that we've been told existed if we do these changes for our path towards the European Union.
Can I ask you a little bit about Russian interference in North Macedonia? I mean, one of the reasons why enlargement needs to happen quickly, they say, is because the countries in the Western Balkans need to be brought into the EU away from the Russian orbit. Is that something that you would agree with, that narrative, that premise?
I think enlargement needs to happen for many reasons, but one of these reasons, from a security perspective, is of course the malign Russian influence that has been existing in our region, that is there. I sometimes like to very openly point out that Russian influence, especially in our region, comes very cheap, and they know how to utilize it.
Muczynski thinks the credibility of the EU is at stake, and enlargement needs to happen to avoid giving ammunition to Russian propaganda.
There are malign actors out there who like to point the finger and say, do you really believe that the EU is honest in its intention for enlargement? Look at what they're doing to the Macedonians.
North Macedonia applied for EU membership 20 years ago, but the accession bid is at a standstill following a series of disputes with Greece and Bulgaria. Catch the full interview next week on the Europe Conversation.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stressed that any ceasefire or peace deal in Ukraine must be lasting. His comments came during a joint press conference with Ukraine's top diplomat Andrei Sybiha as NATO foreign ministers convened at the Brussels HQ for a meeting. Rutte emphasized the need to stand by Ukraine to bring an end to what he called a global conflict. He added that the outcome of this war will determine the future stability and security of other areas like the Indo-Pacific.
Ukraine has shown ultimately there is an audience of one which will be judging the outcome of this war, and that is the first Secretary of the Communist Party of China, Mr. Xi Jinping. And he will be watching who comes out on top. Is it Russia or the West? And that will also inform him in his next steps in the Indo-Pacific. I have no doubts.
Sybiha reaffirmed his country's commitment to peace. The Ukrainian foreign minister noted that more pressure must be exerted on Russia to agree to a peace deal and end the bloodshed.
Russia must get serious about peace. For this, it is time to increase pressure on Moscow. Now is the time for diplomacy, but also pressure and deterrence. While the media attention is on global trade wars, we must not forget there is a real full-scale war going on in Europe. Russia remains an existential threat to Europe.
Sybiha says Kyiv accepted a U.S. proposal for a full unconditional ceasefire, which Putin has not. The top Ukrainian diplomat is set to hold bilateral talks with partners and allies to explore ways to bring the fighting in his country to an end.
World leaders have been reacting to US President Donald Trump's announcement of a 10% baseline tariff on all countries, with Australia threatening to use dispute resolution powers in its free trade agreement with the United States.
We will continue to make the strongest case for these unjustified tariffs to be removed from our exporters. Our existing free trade agreement with the United States contains dispute resolution mechanisms.
China, which was hit with an extra 34% tariff, has said it will resolutely adopt countermeasures to safeguard its rights and interests, claiming Trump's so-called reciprocal tariffs violate international trade rules and amount to unilateral bullying. Japan, too, has called the tariffs extremely regrettable, with officials arguing Japan deserves an exemption considering the additional 24% levies already imposed on their country. And in South Korea, which was hit with a 25% rate, the stock market opened lower amid concerns over the tariff announcement. Although Canada and Mexico were exempt from this particular round, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said Ottawa will respond, as the current 25% levies on steel and aluminium imposed on both nations remain in place. The president of South Korea has been removed from office in a unanimous ruling by the country's constitutional court. Yoon Suk-yeol was impeached by the National Assembly in December, with his presidential power suspended after he imposed martial law, triggering the country's worst political crisis in decades. Following their ruling, the court justices said this act violated people's fundamental rights.
국민 주권주의 및 민주주의를 부정하고 병력을 투입시켜 중앙선관위를 압수수색하도록 하는 등 헌법이 정한 통치 구조를 무시하였으며
Anti-Yoon protesters welcomed the verdict with cheers at a rally near the Old Palace. While outside Yoon's official residence, his supporters chanted angry slogans, calling anyone accepting the ruling their enemy. An election will be held within 2 months to replace Yoon, but is likely to be overshadowed by the deep-rooted political divide caused by the former president's impeachment.